Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name's Alex, or user Canley on Wikimedia projects. I'm going to be taking you through a bit of a showcase of sort of the Australian Wikimedia or Wikidata community's work on Wikidata. So I'd like to start off by acknowledging that I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people in Australia. And I'd like to acknowledge any First Nations people who are attending today, or and elders past, present, and emerging, whether in Australia, in Aotearoa, or around the world. So Wikimedia Australia has a chapter, but there's a Wiki Project Australia, which is a quite small but very passionate and very productive community of Wikimedia editors and who are working on Wikidata. There's a link there to the Australian project. And I also wanted to absolutely point out today, and you'll see it come up a lot, our good friends across the ditch in Aotearoa, New Zealand. They also have a very small, passionate and productive Wikidata community, and we work very closely with them on all sorts of projects, helping each other out and giving advice and sharing queries and so on. So I'll mention the New Zealanders quite a lot today as well as some of the Australian topics, and as always, thank them for their support over many years. So I wanted to start off with a bit of a case study about setting up every locality or every human settlement in Australia in Wikidata. So every gazetted suburb that is officially registered with the government, usually the state government in Australia, suburb, locality, villages, towns, cities in Australia and New Zealand. And so there was a bit of a project a couple of years ago to sort of get all these places or human settlements or subclasses of human settlement on Wikidata onto to Wikidata. There's some numbers there. These are about 2-3 years old, so they're from 2018. But this was kind of at the end of the project, and it was comparing Australia's official mapping agency, Australia Post, the Electoral Commission, the Bureau of Statistics, and Wikidata. And as you can see, Wikidata is pretty much up there, and there's around 15 to 17 or even 18,000 localities. The reason the numbers differ is various reasons. Some places, list names, multiple items, and so on. But Wikidata certainly, pretty much reached the cover, almost, if not complete, but very close to full coverage of human settlements. And New Zealand too. New Zealand was I think the New Zealand Gazette here. There was localities in New Zealand, and that was sort of done quite quickly. But I think there's a pretty much full set of settlements in there. So the aim is to have a consistent set of information. The country, of course, where it is, the gazetted name or official name, state, territory, or region. The local government area or territorial authority, postcode, if that applies to to that locality, coordinates, and these can be either a centroid coordinate of the polygon of the border, or if there's a town centre or a population centre, it could be the coordinates of that main population area, and the electoral districts that or locality lies in, so the electorate. Identifiers are, of course, very important. I mentioned the Australian Bureau of Statistics. They have census districts, which very closely correspond to all the suburbs and localities in Australia, and they all have an individual ID. I'll tell you a bit more about the census shortly. The New Zealand Gazetteer has an ID for the whole country. A lot of these states and territories in Australia will have their own databases or gazetteers or data sets, and they'll have their own identifiers, so it's important to add those. Geonames is another one that has, it's a sort of an online geographic database for all over the world, and everywhere has a particular ID. And lastly, OpenStreetMap, or OSM, a relation ID for the border, which has been imported into OpenStreetMap. You can link to that from Wikidata, and that can either can bring up maps in the info box or in Wikidata itself. And yeah, that's just another way. There's been a few talks on OpenStreetMap, and there's a few coming up. There was a great talk about linking Wikidata and OpenStreetMap by Min Nguyen earlier today for me, but it could have been yesterday if you're not in Australia. And also there's a couple of talks coming up about OpenStreetMap in the Asia Pacific region, in the Philippines, and I think one on rivers, which is coming up next. So yeah, if you're interested in the connections between OpenStreetMap and Wikidata, please feel free to join those talks or see the recordings. Other information we like to include, but if it's available, name in the local Indigenous language. So a lot of the names of official gazetted suburbs are not necessarily the names that the local Indigenous people have called it. So they can be included as aliases in the Wikidata item. Traditional landowners. This is so I mentioned I'm coming to you from the Wurundjeri land. The Australia Post, the Australia National Post Agency, is now including traditional owners field on their envelopes, and that's raised a request or a desire to create a comprehensive national database of traditional owners of the various lands in Australia. So I'm hopeful that will enable, that can be used as a source and for Wikidata, and we can put that information in. Derivation of name. Toby's asked, is there a property for traditional landowners? I don't think there really is. I had a bit of a look around. There may be, but it probably would be, if there is could be something global. But yeah, if there's not, I'll be interested in arranging the creation of that. Derivation of the name, named after. So a lot of places are named after a person or another place. Population, and as I said, I'll get to more information about the census shortly. Area of the defined boundary or area of the locality. Neighbouring and adjacent localities, where you can use the P47 property shares border with. And although the aim is to put in all human settlements, localities, and so on, no reason to stop there. We'd up to also do every kind of geographic entity that we can get all this information for: islands, rivers, mountains, lakes, and so on. Some of the issues we've encountered in working on this over the last couple of years: localities with the same name, particularly where they're in the same state or territory. That makes it difficult to reconcile them to an entry in a database or a gazetteer. Bulk imports and duplicates not being reconciled with existing items. So there are some bulk imports to some language edition Wikipedias, such as Cebuano Wikipedia, where a bot has created Wikidata items corresponding to those articles, and that can result in a lot of duplication of what is essentially the same entity. If you're a really good data citizen, you can go in and merge those together in geonames or in the Cebuano wiki, but sometimes that's a bit too much to do. Data changing in identifiers. For example, the New South Wales Geographic Names Board keeps changing their identifiers. So Toby and I have been working on trying to get the new ones. Abolished localities being abolished or added or renamed, and electoral redistributions and council mergers. What can the data be used for? In the Wikimedia environment, it can be used for campaigns, photo campaigns like Wiki Loves Monuments and Wiki Loves Earth, and also it's very useful for structured data on commons. Outside of the Wikimedia sphere, it can be used for localities, working at localities in a local government area or in an electorate, looking at postcodes, populating info boxes on Wikimedia Commons, or if the community is accepting of it on Wikipedia, and also large-scale changes such as census updates, redistributions, and council mergers, which have all happened quite recently. In Australia, so New South Wales, there are a lot of council mergers. Redistributions happen regularly for the electoral districts, and in Australia, the census happens every 5 years, so there can be a lot of bulk update, but I'll cover that shortly. So there was a big project to link census data, localities in Wikidata to their corresponding census district in 2016, so 5 years ago. Some of the scope of that is there are about, as I showed you in that table before, there are about 17,000 localities in Australia. There's about 14,000 articles on the English Wikipedia which use the Infobox Australian Place template. And we use a template also to point to the correct reference for the census. And there's about 8,500 uses of those. There's all in all, that just means that there's going to be, when a new census is conducted and released, the data is released, it can be quite a task to update these thousands of info boxes or articles in Wikipedia, in multiple language Wikipedias. Whereas we're looking at various ways to make that easier by using Wikidata, whether it's invoking Wikidata from an info box, or contacting the API of the Bureau of Statistics, or using Wikidata. But we're looking at several options for that, and hopefully, when the data is released in a year, we'll be sort of a bit further along, and we'll be able to manage that a lot more easily than updating every article. So some of the areas this could be used: heritage. There's very comprehensive heritage data in Wikidata for all Australian states, territories, and New Zealand. And those can be used, for example, we used Listeria to generate subject lists or lists of potential photographic subjects for the Wiki Love Monuments projects. Biota, there's some amazing work being done on documenting the unique biota of Australia and New Zealand, particularly by Margaret Donald in Australia and Siobhan Edgman in New Zealand. They're similar to the geographic work on localities. We're looking at importing protected areas in New Zealand and Australia into Wikidata, and really that will help the Wiki Loves Earth projects, Wiki Loves Earth's competitions and campaigns, linking taxa to researchers, authority control, naming wiki species and iNaturalist, and helping tools and sites. So that should be sites from S that use Wikidata, such as Bionomia. Oops, sorry. There's also a couple of other projects that the Australian Wikidata community's jumped into. Wiki Project Every Politician. So we've got quite high up on the ranking there, and the new Gov Directory project, which has been some presentations on that at WikiCon. WikiCite. So the Australian community has been very active in the various WikiCite projects. There were not 1, 2, but 3 conferences on WikiCite that were held. 2 mini conferences held in Melbourne, and a Australian stream at the virtual WikiCite conference in 2020. There's a Wikidata R package that was developed from a WikiCite grant that Thomas Shaffey will be demonstrating later today in this stream. And we look forward to working with the future iterations of WikiCite and the shared citations framework. In summary, Wikidata needs curators, people with knowledge, time, and resources to work towards completeness of an area. So to do something like collecting and getting all the localities into Wikidata, it needs someone to, I guess, track the progress and solve problems and find data and import it and so on. But there needs to be a balance between bulk imports and bulk processing and the human touch for reconciliation, translation, errors and mismatches, and detecting duplicates. And in terms of evangelism, the data being available, Wikidata needs evangelists to demonstrate to institutions and researchers the possibility of using Wikidata and its tools for analysis and visualization. So that's it from me. I'll hand over to Toby, and we will take you through some more details on Wikidata in Australia.
Thanks, Alex. If you can make me the presenter or whatever that is. Yep. Okay, super. Thanks. All right. I hope you can see my screen now. I've gone full screen, so I can't see you anymore, but I was just going to tell you a couple of things. Actually, this is not really a super correct title. I will tell you about entity explosion, but I wanted to look at a more of an Australian perspective. I've been putting up this slide in all of the talks I've given during COVID, just because partly I think it's worth having a global perspective on whatever we are doing, but also because COVID is such a global problem that it's worth being aware of everyone's situation. So hello from wherever you're from. I see lots of familiar faces in the audience, so I guess lots of you are from around Australia or New Zealand, but it's good to see everyone here. At the moment, of course, Australia has its highest COVID caseload that we've had to date. So it is a bit of a challenging time, but I'm glad that we got until the point of vaccination before it hit us hard. So I also have a column here for Wikidata properties. You'll see why, but I'm especially interested in making sure we have lots of properties describing everything we do and outbound links to lots of databases all over the web. So Australia is doing well in the property stakes. There's you can see up the top here, a property by country dashboard, which I'd encourage you to visit at some point. Because yes, it keeps track of both how many properties your country has, but also how well described they are, how well the actual property is described in Wikidata. This has been steadily increasing. Certainly there are a lot of Australian editors keen to showcase Australian databases, and so there's lots of property proposal action. Proposing a property is quite complicated, so the form to fill out is long and tedious, but if you haven't done that before, I'd encourage you to have a go. And it's also nice to see people who fix up and just make the property work, the proposal work, so don't feel like you'll be left on your own. Here is a slightly old query that just asked about all of our properties in Wikidata. How many do we have? What types of property do we have? And you'll notice that by far the biggest is an external ID, which is not usually the type of property we show off when we showcase Wikidata. We ask really complex queries that link all kinds of domains together and answer interesting questions. I love that. That's a fantastic outcome of Wikidata, but it's not the bulk of our properties. The bulk of our properties are just identifiers, numbers or codes that reference the same item in a different database out there in the web somewhere. And so I want to think through a little bit more about what we can do with those external identifiers and show you an app that I built to use them. So here's an identifier or a bunch of identifiers, I guess. In my field, chemistry, if you have a particular molecule, it will appear in numerous different databases. They'll each have their own little specialty, and they'll each be giving data about that molecule. But in all, we want to perhaps collect that data, or at least be able to see a way of navigating between different databases. In Australia, here is a scheme. Well, the scheme works for any country, of course, but the scheme I put together to try to represent how I conceive of getting an institutional database connected properly with Wikidata. So, for example, at first, those databases themselves need identifiers, and permanence in those identifiers is very important. We've had some trouble with impermanent identifiers. And as you can see along this, we will then take on the task of setting up a property and setting up a mix and match upload. Australia, if you look on the list of mix and match by country, we have lots and lots of mix and match sets because I think that's a great way of doing the matching with this personal touch that Alex was talking about. Others are using OpenRefine, which is also super powerful. Then you can see that once we've done as much reconciliation as we can, then there's the opportunity to bulk upload any new items. And so I guess what I was trying to do, if you're interested in doing this on your kind of set of properties that you're interested in, it may help to map out where each of those institutions is up to on this kind of chart. I found that a useful exercise to see where we're up to on a bunch of different institutions. Each property has these URL formatters or match patterns or regular expressions. All of this is actually going to be crucial to what I show you next, which is just how to link everything up using this app, which is called Entity Explosion. It's a Chrome or Firefox or affiliated browser. Whatever browser you use, there's a chance that you can use this as a browser extension. And the idea is that it should be able to discover links and information about the same topic of whatever you're browsing about on other sites. So I'll show you a quick demo. I know most of you have seen some of this, so it's not, you can look up elsewhere a big full explanation that I've done on it. But essentially what we're using is the URL of each site to extract if it's a recognizable URL pattern. So this pattern is recognizable to the app because it's well described in Wikidata. And so it's then going to light up, the little URL button will light up, the browser extension button will light up, and it will then check, if you click on it, it will check whether this identifier is actually described in Wikidata. And if so, it'll provide a whole lot of information from that Wikidata item. It can be done in English or any other language, because here's an example, I think in Chinese from Spotify. So again, using an identifier as part of the string. There it is, we've selected Chinese and we get as much of the information in Chinese as possible. It can be used on all kinds of items. So depending on my audience, I'll talk about it in different ways, and there'll be a talk late tonight about how to use it for creative chemical structure identification. But it works in a lot of everything we have a property for, which is why I'm so keen on making lots of properties. I know we're running out of time, but I guess what I would get to here is that I think it's very much a virtuous circle between Wikidata and Entity Explosion. So if you have friends who you want to encourage to edit Wikidata, but are more interested in getting power out of Wikidata, one way in is to start with Entity Explosion, because it's a kind of thing that you can use without ever visiting Wikidata, but it will improve as Wikidata improves. And so it will actually encourage people to do that edit, do that improvement. And I hope that it's of use to those of you who are already in Wikidata. Certainly, I think it's worthwhile for you to move into Entity Explosion, because it certainly works in the Wiki universe itself. So there are some suggestions on how to get involved, but I think we're running out of time, so I might stop there and take any questions in case I haven't seen any of them. So I'll stop my share. Let's open the floor to questions for either Alex or myself. It looks like Alex has been answering a lot already.
So if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat, or if you're feeling brave, you can mention them here. So we only have around 4 minutes for questions, but yeah. And yes, there's the Etherpad as well.
Yeah, I'll go and have a look at that later. So if you want to put questions in there, I can answer them as the session's ended. So. All right, thanks everyone for joining us today, and yeah, please do stick around and see some of those great talks on geography and OpenStreetMap, and Thomas Shappy demonstrating the Wikidata R package. Yeah, and see you all around for the rest of WikidataCon 2021.